What's up YouTubers and fellow DIYers? It's time for the long-awaited shop build, aka the man cave. Now if your home is anything like mine, it was sold to you with the promise of a 2-car garage, and while this sounded great on paper, when it came time to park those cars amongst all your stored belongings, you suddenly realized you had just been scammed. Now as bare bones as my garage currently stands, it is still extremely tight quarters, and me and the missus struggle to fit 2 vehicles and a motorcycle in this compact space, let alone have room for an entire workshop or any sort of custom floor cabinetry with usable countertops. In today's DIY shop build, I'm going to be walking you through a 2-part series in which I'm going to show you how to maximize this space by building a custom wall-mounted workbench that is not only foldable on demand, but also doubles as a convenient detachable work surface to place anywhere within your garage dwelling. Now before I begin, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to receive all my latest updates on this and future DIY builds. And as always, Amazon affiliate links to all products shown in this video can be found in the description section below. The key to any successful floating workbench lies in the design, strength, and rigidity of the folding hinge. And rather than creating them out of wood, as most creators on YouTube will show you, I took a trip down to the old Amazon to see what was available first, and where I was able to locate these polished steel retractable hinges with a simple tab release feature that collapses the hinges closed. The seller offers them in various sizes to suit most needs, and according to the listing, each pair holds a total weight capacity of approximately 500 pounds. This has yet to be tested on my end though. My package came early, and upon unboxing, I was astonished at the quality and finish of this product. The hinges have a very smooth but stiff sliding transition from close to open or open to close. The release tab is roughly about a thumb's width in size and locks firmly in place when reaching full open. Collapsing the hinge is as easy as depressing the tab and returning it back to the closed position. Also included in my package was a required mounting hardware. Only 3 are being presented here, but all 6 were included as the seller listed. For this build, I also ran down to my local big box home goods store and picked up some 1/8 inch angle iron, a few sticks of 1 1/4 inch square tubing in both 48 and 78 inch lengths, and some 1/8 inch flat stock, all which we'll be needing to build our custom table framing. To begin, I cleared out a section of my garage where I wanted to mount my floating workbench, which was most accessible if working per se in the center of the garage space. I then began by finding and marking my stud locations using neodymium N52 rare earth magnets to locate and mark the hidden drywall screws used to hold the sheetrock in place. Now N52 magnets are very strong and literally jump out of your hand once a screw has been detected. While it is true that this method is not an extremely accurate way of locating center points of studs, for the simple fact that you may have had a contractor who hung your drywall with a crooked eye or unsteady hand, all while trying to secure the sheetrock fastener to the stud locations. But this method will get us close enough for the next step of locating stud spacing so we can determine how wide to make our table frame. If you didn't know, typical stud spacing in most new homes are 16 inches on center, and on some older homes, 24 inches on center. So it's extremely important that we get this part correct if we want our table to remain floating and not falling to the floor under heavy load. Now in my case, my studs were 16 inches on center, which gave me the determination of making my total table length around 65 inches, which is plenty of tabletop real estate for most, if not all, DIY projects, but you can choose to have your table wider or shorter depending on your needs. When it came time to finding stud centers for mounting my lag bolts that will hold our folding hinges bracketry, I used a drill and a small diameter drill bit to poke through the drywall and try and locate the edges of the stud. Now I know a few of you may be asking yourself why I just didn't use a stud finder, and the answer to this is quite simple. While I do have 2 stud finders, the accuracy in my past experience has never been that great. This method for me has always been a true fire way of locating any stud center, and since I have to repair a few larger holes in the sheetrock left behind by the previous owner, it wasn't such a big deal to me. Using some leftover 0.75 by 2.5 pine stock I had from a previous project, I cut 4 5.5 inch long braces. One brace we'll be using to mount to the drywall stud locations, and the other we'll be using to attach our hinge to. I'll demonstrate how this all comes together in just a bit. I marked out 3 hole locations where we'll be screwing in our lag bolts and 1 additional line indicating the location of the drywall screw holding the sheetrock in place. It's always a good habit to mark the location of known screws within the wall so we don't accidentally try and screw into them. This brace will be used to mount our folding hinge. The 6 smaller diameter outer holes that I'm pre-drilling will be used to affix the piece of wood to the one that will be placed behind it. The 3 larger diameter hole locations in the center are the bolt holes used to hold our hinge in place on this workpiece. We are also going to need to countersink the larger bolt locations on the opposite side of the workpiece, so we have a flat, flush surface when mating the 2 pieces together. My suggestion for countersinking is to use a drill bit slightly smaller than the head of the bolt. This will allow the wood to hold the head of the bolt while you tighten the nut on the opposite side. I'm using Craig's 2.5-inch pocket hole screws to anchor my first brace to the wall stud and 6 2-inch screws for mounting the hinge brace to the wall brace. If you haven't used these type of screws with a square head, I highly suggest you give them a try. They make getting a tight torque without stripping a breeze. I'll post a link to this product in the description if you're interested. And that's it, we're finished with hinge mounting. Just rinse and repeat for the opposite side, and now we can begin working on our rail slide guides. To make our rail slide guides, I'm going to be using 1/8 inch angle iron. Since this was leftover stock from a previous project, I didn't have enough length to make 2 entire runners, so I'm going to be cutting my leftover stock into 4 individual slide guides and mounting them to our folding hinge. I highly suggest you spend the extra money and get enough material to make 2 full runners. It's a lot less work in the long run, as you will soon see. Since I'm new to welding, on my slide guides, I chose to weld in bolts to create studs because I wanted to work on my welding skills before moving on to welding the frame. You could totally eliminate this process and just use flathead screws and countersink the holes, and this would completely eliminate all the work involved in the upcoming steps. With our hinges and slide guides out the way now, we can move on to fabricating the table frame. At this point in the project, I still wasn't sure of the depth of my table. I was teetering between 24 and 28 inches, and in the end I went with a nice round number of 27 inches, because that's all I could fit in my wife's Honda Accord rear drop down seat. I seriously need to get a truck. Now that I have my table dimensions all squared away, it's time to mock up the frame and begin marking and trimming the excess square tubing. But before I begin this step, I wanted to add a locking mechanism that would secure the table in place in both the horizontal and vertical positions. For this, I chose to weld in a nut on each rear slide guide and drilling a hole of equal diameter in the square tubing. Adding a nut and bolt rather than a pin offers the assurance of the pin holding things in place. It never comes free, and if you have small young kids like I do, this ensures their safety as well, as we all know how young kids love to play around your work area when you're least expecting. With my locking pins now in place, I began trimming down the sides of my table frame to the required 27-inch depth. I should note that I'm not going to add any kind of fancy joinery method to the framing, such as right angle notching. In fact, I want the square tubing fully exposed on the ends so that I can later add in slip-in attachments when needed for either an extendable tabletop surface or just adding smaller end devices such as a vise or welding surface to work from. I thought this would be a great feature of making my workstation a little more versatile while eliminating the possibility of reduced work surface and the need to drill additional holes in my tabletop. If this is not presently clear to you at the moment, don't worry. This will become more clearly visible as we move later on in the project. Here I'll be marking and cutting down the longer front and back square tubing runs to 45 inches to create a large rectangle. Later in the build, I'll be using this center portion to house my adjustable folding legs for the pull-away standalone feature. Once the sides of the square tubing are welded into place to these 45-inch runs, we will have a large rectangle with the dimensions of 47.5 by 27 inches. Now that I have all my pieces cut to length, it's time to tack weld everything together and check for squaring. Since this is my first real attempt at welding, I want to mention to all you newbie welders that welding is an art form, and with that said, with any trade craft, it's going to require practice and perseverance. If you mess up, don't let this discourage you. In the making of this frame, I myself had to break down a few welded pieces and re-weld things back together before getting my frame true. And I'm not ashamed to admit that. With a few more welding projects under my belt, I'm sure I'll get to the point where I'm laying down beautiful stack welds worthy of a trophy. Ah yes, the dreaded cleanup. If there's one thing I learned about welding this go around, it helps to have really nice clean welds. There's a lot less grinding involved during cleanup. I can remember that just a few weeks back when I was going to buy Husky's wall mounted system and just call it a day. Yeah, that was a smart of me back then. Now that we have the frame complete, it's time to make mounting tabs to secure our table surface to the frame. Here I'm using 1/8 inch thick angle iron and marking 1.5 inch tabs and cutting them to size. And with the magic of video editing, our tabs are now complete and we can weld them in. Using 2 C-clamps to hold my tabs in place and a ruler to ensure everything is flush, I'm going to lay in some tack welds to hold everything in place. I'll then follow up with laying in full welds once everything cools. So that I don't make this video any longer than what it already is, I'm only going to be showing you this section, but just know that I will be doing the same procedure for all 4 corners. And just like that, we're all done with the wall mounting and frame fabrication of this portion of the build. In part 2 of this build series, I will be adding the tabletop and hidden drop-down legs using donor parts from a pre-existing lifetime table I had laying around the garage, and incorporating them into our custom workbench, giving us the pull-away standalone feature. As always, if you enjoyed this build, don't forget to smash that thumbs up button, and if you haven't done so already, don't forget to subscribe. We still have a long way to go in this man cave series. As always, I'm the Chemist, and I'll see you next problem.